Gun games have been a staple of arcades for a long time. My earliest memories of the dimly lit fun-in games at my local mall are filled with golden era arcade games like Pac-Man and Galaga, but also stuff like Crossbow. As time went on, Sega began to move games into their sprite scaling technology, adding an element of depth that shot the realism up quite a bit. I remember playing Line of Fire for the first time in 1989. It straight up blew me the hell away and gave me a newfound appreciation of the genre. Sega kept the ball rolling, releasing more gun games, honing their development skills and making them bigger and better. By the time we got to the System 32 Alien 3, gun games had become one of my favorite genres in the arcade, particularly if I had a friend with me. But Sega really shook things up in 1994 when it brought its first gun game to its powerhouse Model 2 platform. Virtua Cop added not just 3D environments, but also the ability to hit your targets at different locations on their body. You could score head and body shots that had their own unique animations, and you could even shoot the weapons out of their hands to disarm them. Once I discovered it, I was hooked, and it was one of my favorite games every time I walked into an arcade. When it was announced that a Sega Saturn version would hit at the end of 1995, I knew I'd need to be there day one. And in this episode, we will be taking a look at it and its sequel for the Sega Saturn. How close to the arcade were they, and are they still worth playing today? I hope you guys enjoy the Virtua Cop series on the Sega Saturn. Virtua Cop was released in November of 1995, one of the first games made with the much talked about Sega graphics library. For a quick history lesson on the SGL, it's basically a set of development tools designed by members of AM2 to help programmers get a game engine created for the Saturn without an inordinate amount of money and manpower involved. The end result was actually quite compelling, because not only does Virtua Cop run well, it also looks just like the arcade version. Sega even brought along the Virtua Gun from the coin-op release to make the port even more authentic. Like most gun games, Virtua Cop's gameplay mostly revolves around predetermined paths and enemies jumping out from behind various set pieces. You can hit enemies at different points on their body, which does affect your score. Nail a disarm bonus for maximum potential. If you shoot a hostage, you lose your score bonus as well as one of your hit points. Boss encounters show up to keep things interesting, and you have weapon power-ups that give you access to additional weapons like shotguns. Because Sega had this developed in just 7 months, it unfortunately only has the 3 original stages from the arcade, making it quite short. The multiplayer is there to help the replay value, however, and it can be a blast with family and friends. The biggest problem you're going to run into today is playing this on a modern display. Since Virtua Cop uses traditional light gun technology, it will not play properly on an LCD television. You can play it with a regular controller, but it's just not the same. These games are so much more fun with the guns, especially if you have 2 of them. Sega did build in support for the Saturn shuttle mouse, and it works surprisingly well. While it'll never replace the authenticity of the Virtua Gun, it provides pinpoint accuracy and is much faster than a controller. Because this sold so well and was available as a free giveaway with the system for a while, it's one of the cheapest games you're gonna find on the Saturn. The Japanese version often goes for single digits, and the not-for-resale US versions are roughly a tenner. If gun games appeal to you, Virtua Cop is as solid an arcade port as you can get on the old Saturn.
Help me! Don't shoot me!
As the first Virtua Cop was being developed on the Saturn, Virtua Cop 2 was being done for the arcade Model 2. Sega wanted to add more dynamic action sequences and multiple paths to take, freshening up the gameplay quite a bit. It had car chases, battles on trains, and new boss battles to contend with. It was faster, better looking, yet had all the charm and playability of the first. AM2 again would helm the Saturn port, which made its way home in November of 1996. There's Virtua Gun support again, mouse compatibility returns, and you can even use the 3D analog pad. All of that is cool, but what really matters here is that Sega pulled off a freaking miracle with the technical quality of this game. You can say that an on-rail shooter is much easier to get running well when compared to a free-roaming engine, but that still doesn't lessen just how well this port turned out. It captures the entire essence of what made the arcade what it was. Beat for beat, it's got the car chases, the helicopters, the multiple paths. I mean, this is the arcade experience at home. It does run at 30 frames per second instead of 60, and of course there are lower polygon counts on the environment and people, but you'd be hard-pressed to see it unless it was in a side-by-side, and even then the Saturn port holds up extremely well. The one area where it's hard to look past is the content contained within. Sega again gives us just 3 stages, man. Now I understand with the first there were some serious time restrictions and the Saturn needed some games before the end of its first year. It's much less acceptable here to not get some extra stages, particularly at its $50 price point. You can beat the entire game in 20 minutes or so, and an extra stage or two would have helped that immensely. It does have the same appeal in its multiplayer element as the first, so it's hard to hate on it too much. These days, the Japanese version is just as cheap as the original, but the Western versions can be more expensive in good condition. If you're a gun game fan though, it's worth every penny. Virtua Cop 2. The Virtua Cop games were also released bundled with the Virtua Gun, which was also known as the Sega Stunner. These packages were roughly $20 more expensive and a great value if you required one. Every region received some form of this bundle, and there was even a Japanese offering that included both games and a demo of House of the Dead. There were also PC ports of these games that looked and ran great, and there were various ports to the Dreamcast and PS2. Sega would eventually continue this series with Virtua Cop 3 in 2003, but despite using the Xbox-based Chihiro arcade, it was never brought home officially. This has left a void in the series for years, and I still can't believe Sega has yet to give us an option to play it. Sega did bring home Confidential Mission, which plays very similar and a great gun game in its own right. While both Saturn Virtua Cop games had been done in-house at Sega, House of the Dead was unfortunately outsourced to Tantalus Interactive, under less than ideal circumstances. While the port was quite playable and fun, the visual quality took a drop off the deep end. Textures were awful, and the performance was all over the place. After more than 20 years, Sega has turned the IP over to Forever Entertainment, the same company that remade Panzer Dragoon. Simply called House of the Dead Remake, it's slated to be released this year for the Nintendo Switch. It's great to see Sega bringing back some of its retro IPs and gives me hope that we'll be seeing many more in the future. Perhaps if House of the Dead Remake goes well, Sega will bring back the Virtua Cop series and we'll finally get to see Part 3 at home in an official capacity. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.